This Easter, I hope that you can freshly enjoy the grace of God that came upon your life at that moment of your salvation, that moment when you surrendered your life to the Lord Jesus Christ and said, Lord, take me. I want to live for you, honor you, and glorify you. And from that moment, you've endeavored to live for Him. That's when grace washed over your soul in a supernatural way. Absolutely amazing that God would do such a wonderful thing for you and I, His children. The cross where Jesus Christ died to forgive you of your sin didn't really look like a location of grace with everything that took place at the cross, but it most definitely was a very gracious location. Paul writes in Romans chapter 5, verse 20, where sin abounded, grace abounded more. There is no other place in all of history where so much sin abounded as at the cross. And there God thrust upon his holy Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, the complete history of your sin and my sin and the sin of all of his people. John tells us that because God has such a love for mankind, that he was willing to give his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him, believes in Jesus, will be saved. How gracious is God? How willing was Jesus Christ? The great Christian pastor and author John Bunyan, the author of the classic writing Pilgrim's Progress, referred to his own conversion as a miracle of precious grace. Bunyan went on to say that without such grace coming into his life, he would have perished by the stroke of eternal justice. He would have been lost forever. For Bunyan to write so favorably about grace was really quite incredible considering what he went through. After his conversion to Jesus Christ, Bunyan began to preach, and he was preaching in the Congregational Church in 1653. Several years later, he would be arrested in Bedford for preaching without having a license connected to the Anglican Church. And during his imprisonment, Bunyan was offered release and returned to be with his family if he would agree to not go outside the prison and preach. He wasn't allowed to preach the gospel. Bunyan refused, and for that he was imprisoned for a further 12 years. With his voice somewhat silenced to his prison cell, Bunyan began to write. And for his writing, the church has been forever grateful, as from his prison cell came the classic The Pilgrim's Progress. And for years, Bunyan was mistreated. He was separated from his wife and children. He was despised by the crown. Yet he always considered himself incredibly blessed as a recipient of the grace of God. He wrote these words. His whole gospel is a gospel of grace, words of peace and salvation. Bunyan was just taking in God's grace. And as Bunyan, from his cold, dark prison cell, looked to the cross where Jesus Christ took on himself all of his sin, he breathed a thank you for God's grace. Grace has been expressed in these words as being God's riches at Christ's expense, which is exactly what Easter is all about. Where our sin abounded, keeping us from a needed relationship with the holy God, to where grace at Calvary abounded so much more as Christ suffered in our place to redeem us from the chains of sin and place us into the eternal family of God. You see, God's grace is so sweet, God's grace is so precious. I trust this Easter time, as you reflect on the cross, as you reflect on Jesus dying for you, as you reflect on your giving your life to Him, I trust this Easter time that you'll be able to reflect on how much grace it just ministered to your life, just as it did to the life of John Bunyan. Remember that phrase? Grace is a miracle of precious grace. That's what grace is. That's what our conversion is, this miracle of precious grace. May you remember that. May you be blessed as you enjoy and celebrate your conversion to Jesus Christ this Easter and all that He has done in your life graciously for His glory. Thanks for listening. Look forward to catching you after Easter. Have a great Easter.